African parents, I think it is high time we changed our ways of raising children. Yes, it is Africa, but it is not a zoo. You don't have to always beat up your children or dismiss their feelings in the name of disciplining them or giving them the African upbringing. Because most of this African upbringing can be categorized as abuse. And I am not saying that all African parents are abusive, but this is something I think is deeply entrenched in the culture and it is highly normalized within the African culture and it needs to change.
Hey guys, hi YouTube. So this topic, whenever I scroll on social media, I run into it every single time, and I was like, I want to talk about it because now that I'm a mom and I'm a parent myself, there's just some things that I'm not gonna do because growing up in Africa, so in the African community, especially in Africa, growing up, you were disciplined. You were disciplined with whatever your parents could get their hands on. If it's a pan or it's a belt or the sticks my mom would always send us outside to go get because you did something. If you, like, for example, when they told you not to touch the stove and you touch the stove, you're going to be dragged with the ear and called and beaten, with the stick. And if you get a small one, sometimes they send you to go get it yourself. I remember being in boarding school and the amount of times I was hit because I just did not do well. I didn't do well with it. To this day, I sometimes ask myself, how did boarding school affect me growing up? Because I realized later it did. It did something to me. Like every time they would be calling my dad, like, oh, she lost her clothes. She's crying again. Or she didn't put on her socks when we had to line up to do the national anthem and all this stuff. It was always something. I didn't do well with boarding school. And later on, I think my parents even regretted taking me to boarding school. But I was disciplined so much that when we heard that we were coming to America, I was so excited. I was like, nobody's gonna get a stick and hit me anymore. But this is normal. Being hit in an African household is very normal. Where we were having a discussion somewhere in an African event, and somebody made a comment about, the reason why, if they misbehave, get the belt or get the stick, because that seems to work. Being African, you're supposed to respect older people and elders, right? So these elders can be your parents who are wrong about certain things, and you are not allowed to speak up or be against anything. You are not really supposed to be heard. And this is one thing that I try to not do with my son. Like, if he has something to tell me and he's thinking about something, I hear him out. I don't just shut him down and be like, go over there and go to your room and go be quiet. I try to hear what he's trying to tell me. Some of this stuff, it's kind of emotional now that I think back about it, because it just doesn't make sense to me. How could you not hear a child out? Like if they come up to you and say, Mom, I have a question. Mom, I'm thinking about something. Why do you shut them down, The other thing is this whole thing where you respect elders, but you're not allowed to express your opinion about anything. You just, okay, the elders are right, and go about your day, It's like, no, that's not right. Questioning an elder is like, who is this child? What are they doing? Africans insult their kids. They insult you. They call you really different names. From stupid all the way to, this one that walks whatever a certain way. They will call you names. And this is something I don't do. I don't call my son names. I just don't. Because to me, words, they say have a lot of power. So if you're calling your child, come here, stupid, you're stupid, you're stupid, you're stupid. Words have power. Somebody will believe that eventually. Parents have power in what they say and what they do. Kids are listening and they're watching. And so the thing where they say, when kids walk into a room, light up and look at them and hear them, see them, be excited to see them. Those things I try to do myself, because you don't want to come home and, your kid says, Mom, guess what I did today? And you kind of give them the look like you don't want to even look at them. You don't care. But one of the things I realized that a lot of African parents were carrying trauma themselves. What they did what they saw being done before. If you did something, for example, in Africa, like in your village, you know, somebody will report you to the other person, and it becomes this whole issue where now you're being, oh my God, everybody's talking about you and how bad you are and how wrong you are. You know, even when you tell like somebody like, hey, please don't say anything about it, like they spread it. They spread it and tell the whole village, this child is bad. She did this, she did that, he did this, he did that. And just really making you feel so bad. You know, my dad, a lot of Africans, they belittle you in so many ways. I'm not saying that my parents made me feel that way, but they had their share of things that they did wrong. And so now that I look at that, I try to not do certain things too with my son, you know, because I keep in mind how that made me feel. Another thing is the taboo of talking about sex. Growing up, I didn't know anything about anything. Like, I learned everything later on by myself. I wish somebody would have sat me down and talked to me about certain things, because I'm going to do that, and I'm doing that. Some of that stuff I'm starting to introduce to my son. We're talking about sex and things like that, because that is such taboo. Even my period, when I got my period, I got it, and I was like, oh, this is what my mom mentioned that I would get at some point. And I was freaked out about it, because I was just like, oh my gosh, what is, you know, she did the little that she could, but it was kind of, she was nervous, you know, and I just was like, if I had a girl, I was like, I would tell her everything, you know. Open is very useful. The earlier on you tell your kids all this stuff, the better. They know, so they're not going to hear it from other people, you know. It was hard, you know. There was sometimes I just was like, man, when I came to America and heard that, you know, kids have rights and somebody can't put their hands on you, and you can actually, if they're being abusive to you, you can call the cops and all that. I was like, oh, okay, good to know, because in Africa that's non-existent. Like, kids are seen, they're not supposed to be heard complaining or, you know, disagreeing or anything. And that bothers me. You know, I love the social media that I've watched, you know. People are just like, they were traumatized. They traumatize kids. And kids growing up just being so like fearful. Yeah, so yes, African parents, you know, they did the best that they can. But man, the other side of that was just like brutal for some people. And some of them were not even aware of what they're doing. It's just been done. You know, everybody's been hit, you know, but with a stick somewhere. So you do the same thing. And a lot of people are mentioning how African parents don't want to admit that they're wrong. You know, just admit you're wrong and you made a mistake, or even apologize, you know, later on, like, hey, I messed up. You know, I was doing the best that I can, but I messed up and I'm sorry that blah, 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 blah. Even saying sorry to you, for an African parent to say, I'm sorry, that's something that is just hard for them, for it to come out and be like, I'm wrong. You know, it's like, it is rough, guys. I didn't have it as bad, thank God. My older sister did, and my brother, you know, they were taking care of us, and they had a lot to do with that. But also, in an African household, you're kind of pushed to grow up fast, you know. You're being left with your siblings and to take care of them and carry on that load. I didn't have to deal with that. My older sister did, you know, and all that. But they had to take care of us, and whether you wanted it or not. And that's another thing that I don't like, is that's one of the reasons I said, hey, if it's not meant for me to have another child, it's not meant for me. Because I'm not going to put my son to go do everything to help me with the new child. He also deserves a childhood. He doesn't need to be worried about helping me with this, helping me with that, because we have a new baby in the house and all that stuff. I don't want that. I want him to enjoy being a child, instead of just this whole thing where it's back-to-back children and, oh, well, they got the older sibling who's going to help them. No, they deserve their own time to really enjoy being that sibling too. They enjoy each of those times. They need to have that. It's not normal to just have kids back to back and expect them to carry the thing when you're not. You know, yes, African parents have that look. You know, a lot of black parents do too. That look, like, you know, I'm gonna get you when they give you that look and you're like, oh shoot, I'm in trouble. But overall, you know, I understand that, you know, a lot of Africans parents did the best they can. But there's some things that, you know, they really needed to admit that they were wrong and just maybe apologize later to their kids. Like, hey, I messed up. I'm sorry. That's it. Instead of, oh, I am the elder, you know, I'm right. You're wrong. You're a child. Be quiet. You know, it's just like, I was like, no, I'm not doing that with my child, you know? I was like, you're welcome to express your opinion, express what you think, ask questions that are in your head, you know, even if they don't make sense. You're not stupid, you know, I'm not going to call you this and call you that, you know? I get irritated. Sometimes I get mad at him, but I don't call him names. At the end of the day, when I'm wrong about something, I do tell him I'm sorry, that I yelled and blah, 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 just to realize that. Get in the habit of saying sorry. Because a lot of times, African parents just don't. They don't. So, also just for African parents to admit that, hey, they're dealing with trauma. They dealt with trauma, and they're carrying that around. This is also comes in when African parents try to push kids to be certain things. And how dare you say, I don't want to be a doctor or a lawyer? How dare you? You know? Why can't you be like the other person on the comparison things? They love to compare you to your siblings or the other person, the neighbor's kids next door, and tell you, you know, you didn't do it. You're not doing it. Look at what they're doing. That makes people feel a certain way. All this stuff build up, and now you have kids that have to go back and try to get some counseling because they're not okay. I just realized all this now. I'm like, oh my God. Oh, well, you gotta have thick skin, but thick skin is good, but then how long can you deal with being put down and somebody hitting you constantly, and it's just back to back of just crazy chaoticness? Like, oh, guys, I can go on forever. I'm glad that my parents were not my parents were okay, you know, and I did have a good upbringing. They did their thing, but there's things, of course, the mistakes that they made. And if anything, I did apologize to my mom when I had my son. I told her, you know, I am sorry for if I gave you a hard time. I was difficult sometimes. And I told her, you know, I appreciate you and thank you for raising me and our siblings and all that. I did tell her that, and I broke down crying. But at the end of the day, I'm grateful for her. I'm grateful for my dad because he did everything to make sure we were always good. But it doesn't stop from that. Somebody also made mistakes, and I use it as a learning experience. So for the things that I don't want to do, the whole thing where you're not allowed to say you're not okay, like, oh, you're crying, okay, like, snap out of it. You know, tears, no, you're weak. We don't want to see tears. Get up and go, you know, like, it's just your feelings are kind of just, oh, whatever, you know, it's just bad. Let somebody express how they feel. So, yeah, that's just my